It is a minute past 2 o'clock. You are on Diamond FM Mutares on and only radio station 103.8 on FM. We are also available on the internet at www.diamondfm.co.zw. Broadcaster from 87C Herbert Chitepo Street, right in the heart of Mutare, the Eastern Highlands, capital of the province of Manicaland in the Southern African nation of Zimbabwe. It is a big day for us in Zimbabwe, as a short while ago we witnessed the inauguration of the President of the Republic, and a short while ago again we were broadcasting from the Manicaland Agricultural Show where Prudipuru Muskana Wekusakuva, she was holding it down with Lumpy aka Skeet aka Chops the Ghost aka the Uptown Babe. He's got so many AKAs, I don't think he remembers his real name at all, but then again that is a conversation for another day. We welcome you this particular Sunday to the Sunday Glide. My name is JB. I am your DJ. Thank you for choosing Diamond FM. And like we do every last Sunday of the month, we bring you a very special program brought to you by our partners, Nokutenda Disability Foundation. It is a program that looks at means and interventions that are necessary to alleviate the people who are living with mental health conditions, and also to address needs in the mental health sector. So today we are going to have a special program. We got guests lined up, and I'll be telling you about that and about them after this here jingle.
There is a plan and purpose to value every life, no matter what location, age and gender, disability. At Nokutenda Disability Foundation, we value you. Get some help on mental health, disability in Zimbabwe. Nokutenda Disability Foundation, everyone matters. You are value. Kaga tekile. Siyalimeda.
We rise by lifting others, helping others without expecting anything in return is what true self is all about. We offer rehabilitation, income projects, psycho support and awareness, basic needs at Nokutenda Disability Foundation.
Disability Foundation. We value you. Get some help on mental health, disability in Zimbabwe. Nokutenda Disability Foundation. Everyone matters. Listen, Makakosha. You are value. Kaga tekile. Siyalimeda. Lizelonke. Zimbabwe.
4 minutes past 2 o'clock in Zimbabwe, and like we said, today we have a special program, and we are going to be speaking on stigma, and to help us do that, like we always do every last Sunday of the month, and today, the 26th of August 2018 is the last Sunday of this month of August, and I am joined by guests, a very special guest from right across the world. I'll start with somebody who's been here before. I've got the chairperson of Nokutenda Disability Foundation, Kudzai Nyamande. He is over in Australia. What time is it in Australia, Kudzai? Kudzai, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Kudzai?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, we got your feed now. What time is it in Australia, Kudzai?
9:35 p.m.
9:35 p.m. Wow. It is 5 minutes past 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Zimbabwe. And Kudzai he'll be also just helping give context to the Zimbabwean situation in terms of the people living with this mental health challenges. I have in the United States of America from an organization called Suffering in Silence. I got Ali Cashel. How you doing, Ali?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Great stuff. And what time is it? In which city, which state are you?
I, right now, am at my parents' home in Vermont in a pretty small town called Shrewsbury. And it's 8 o'clock in the morning. I just had my breakfast.
What time is it in the morning?
It's 8 a.m.
Wow, beautiful stuff. And okay, we also got a mental health advocate who's also a singer and a poet, and he's going to recite and kind of like amaze us with a few poems here. We've got Mike Rawson. Mike, how are you doing? Mike, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, Ali is in Vermont out there. Where are you?
We are all over the world this morning. I'm out in Amagansett, Long Island, at the very end of New York State.
All right.
But it's also 8 o'clock in the morning here, so I guess Ali and I are both sharing a cup of coffee from across the United States. So.
Yeah, great stuff that. So today we're going to be focusing on stigma, and perhaps to get this underway, maybe let me start with you, Ali, there. What would you say is stigma? Could you just define it for our listeners, Ali?
Sure. I think stigma has a lot to do with the way we as a culture see people's experiences. If we look at them through a negative lens, or if we're carrying some negative association about that person or about their experience for some reason, I think that's a stigma that we have in ourselves and that we often project onto other people.
All right. Kudzi, that pretty much covers stigma, doesn't it? Or maybe you got also a few words you want to word, or maybe so that perhaps, in our own understanding here, what would you say stigma, which is separate from what Ali said there?
Typically what Ali said, but the Oxford Dictionary defines stigma as a set of negative and often unfair beliefs that a society or a group of people have about something. Mm-hmm. So stigma carries with it a lot of negative connotations to it, which a certain group of the client, a certain group of a society are at the end of negative attitudes, mm-hmm. and from another group of people. So yeah, that's what stigma is.
All right, and Mike, you are an advocate there for in terms of mental health issues, and in your experiences, in your line of work, when you go out and you're meeting people in the community there, what is the kind of stigma that is prevalent, particularly against or maybe being projected towards people with mental health challenges? I think we're having a time delay with Mike there, or perhaps let me come to you, Ali. In the United States of America, particularly, what stereotypes and what particular sectors would you say this is stigma against people with mental health challenges, Ali?
Yeah, so the mental health community here in the United States is often stigmatized and sort of assumed that they are. We almost see people with serious mental health concerns on like the outskirts of our society. Mm-hmm. People feel as though they can't speak about their conditions. They can't be open about their struggles with their work, with their family, and their relationships. And I think that the effect of that is that it makes people unable to sort of reveal this part of themselves and then take good care of that part of themselves. And I think we see that really across the board in U.S. society and with mental health, but I think with illness in general. And that's really what I do most of my work on is taking a look at the way that invisible conditions, whether they are mental health struggles or some other kind of illness or disability, the way that stigma influences our experiences of those conditions and sort of what we can do to help people start speaking up more about it and becoming more vocal about that experience. Because I think that's something that we really don't do here as a result of the stigma that we feel and the way that people sort of assume that there's something wrong with us. Maybe we're over dramatic. Maybe we are making it up, or it's in our head, or it's not something that we need treatment for to get better. And I think both with mental health and with physical illness together, if we can look at these conditions as something that we can support each other through rather than sort of push to the side and ignore, I think everyone would be better for it.
All right. And Kudzi, you from here in Zimbabwe, and you also know perhaps the cultural background here. Ali there spoke about the need for us to support each other. Usually here, sometimes when the family wants to support somebody who has a mental health challenge, they begin maybe to go for the spiritual way. You know what I'm talking about. They go to Sangomas, traditional healers. They begin to think perhaps it's the ancestors who are angry with them, or perhaps there's something that they did wrong. How do you think, Kudzi, the stigma that is prevalent here in Zimbabwe, maybe slightly different from the stigma there as characterized by Ali in that conversation she just gave us there?
Yes, in a way, Zimbabwe has got a different, different way that we see stigma. In the sense that in Zimbabwe we kind of relate mental illness to religious and witchcraft. So instead of seeing mental illness as an illness that requires treatment, that is just like any other illness, like diabetes, like any other illness, like having a broken bone that needs to have a plaster of Paris. So in a way, mental illness is not perceived in that sort of way. And this is shared across Africa. I was talking to my friend from Ghana who said that people with mental illness in Ghana, they are sent to prayer rooms where someone prays for them 24 hours daily. So instead of sending someone who has got mental illness to a treatment center or a hospital in Ghana, they send them to some camps where there's people who are praying and dancing. So imagine the trauma that this person who is mentally unwell is having to put up with people praying for him and whatever. When in a way, mental illness is an illness that requires medication treatment, that requires psychotherapy, like psychology, talking therapies. So that's the extent of how stigma can have, that it can ostracize people, that they are put away. In Zimbabwe, when I was growing up, I know people who were locked in the room with mental illness because people don't want to be associated with illness. It was a sign of shame. It was a sign of, people, the spirit has forsaken us. So people end up being chained. Actually, I was talking to someone who comes from Zimbabwe, and it's still happening now that people who have mental illness are chained to a tree, and they are fed there. So they are kind of, in a way, their movements are limited to that tree and chain.
All right.
So this is extent of stigma that it can have on a society.
All right, we will come back to that, to particular cases, but Mike is just informing me that his mic is fixed now. Mike's mic is fixed. I like the sound of that. But Mike, you are a mental health advocate, and in your experiences in your line of work as you're going out, because we had Akudzi there describing scenarios. He spoke about the West African country of Ghana, where people are sent into prayer rooms. I was watching a program on TV on one of the international news networks about in the Middle East there, where people are then sent to religious schools where they are prayed over because they think it is a spiritual thing. In your experiences in the United States of America, looking at the cultural context in the United States of America, and like you are in New York and the cosmopolitan nature of New York, what particular cases of stigma have you encountered which perhaps stand out for you? Then you say, we must do something about this.
Sure. I have seen it change in every place that I go to. Every place is different. Every story is different. Each person's experience is going to be totally unique to where they're from, the resources that they have available to them, the types of people that surround them, the type of love that surrounds them. But one thing that I think is that I've at least seen in common everywhere I go is that the effect of stigma is that people who feel like they are going through some trouble feel like they are alone and feel like it is somehow their fault and it's because they are imperfect in some way. And I just, in my experience, I'm not sure I've witnessed anything that's further from the truth. You know, I was teaching a poetry workshop at a addiction recovery center in Los Angeles, California, which is a pretty liberal, pretty forward-thinking place. You know, I think we'd be hard-pressed to come up with a more liberal city if we were to try to imagine one. And here was a young woman, she was about 19 years old, who had gotten into some trouble with drug addiction. And she told me that when she had been 13 years old, she had loved writing. She loved telling stories and telling her stories, and that when addiction started to come into her life, which an addiction, you know, this is something a lot of folks don't know, that is absolutely a form of mental illness that is right up there with, you know, something like depression or any of the others that we might discuss on today's program. And she shared that she stopped writing because she was afraid no one wanted to hear stories from someone who was dealing with depression. And that in losing her ability to write, she lost one of the healthy behaviors that she thought might have helped keep her from such a dangerous addiction. So, you know, here's a pretty clear case of, we have this societal view, this societal take that says addiction and depression are less than perfect, therefore we shouldn't talk about it, therefore we should hide it underneath a rug or behind a closet door. And because of that, one young woman lost what was essentially a really healthy behavior because she was afraid. Because she thought she was alone, because she thought she was less than perfect.
Oh, all right. Okay. And you've spoken there about writing. After a few questions here, we're going to invite you to give us one of the poems that you did. And we'll give you that opportunity in a few moments' time. But Alice, your organization, Suffering the Silence, could you just give us the background? What is it then that led to the formation of Suffering the Silence, and what are the objectives? What ends do you hope to attain?
Sure, thank you. Suffering the Silence works with any community, any illness group that has felt stigmatized or silenced or pushed to the fringes in some way. When I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with a condition called Lyme disease, and the presence of that condition, it created severe neurological dysfunction. I struggled to speak. I was struggling with my memory. And I was severely ill, but there was such stigma and controversy associated with that diagnosis that by some doctors we were refused treatment and told that it was impossible that I was suffering from that condition, that the symptoms were all in my head, and that I was mentally ill, and that diagnosis of a mental illness felt almost like a dismissal rather than an engagement to try and help me get better. And try and help me find the right treatment. And the experience of that left me feeling like I couldn't come to terms with what had happened to myself, left me feeling afraid to tell doctors or tell the people who could help me what was going on in my body and what was going on in my brain. And I started talking to other people who shared my diagnosis and other people around the country and around the world who lived with invisible conditions that doctors or family members couldn't always see and couldn't always clearly understand, but that those conditions shaped that person's life. And I learned that I was not the only person who felt silenced or felt ignored or felt dismissed. There are people all over the world who have received a diagnosis, who are trying to get help, who feel like they can't talk about what it is that is going on in their everyday life and the symptoms and the experiences that are shaping them. So I decided to start Suffering the Silence to help people break the silence that they're feeling all of the time, to give them a platform to speak up, to share their story, to break down some of the stigma that's associated with fear of illness, both mental and physical.
All right. And we know that Nokutenda Disability Foundation is such a platform also. We'll come back to Kudzi. But Mike, Ali there spoke about speaking up and giving people a platform. You are on the platform we call Diamond FM. It is a radio station. You are a poet. We want you to hear Speak Up Against Stigma.
Oh, my gosh. What an invitation. Thank you. All right, I guess I'll just jump in and I'll share, with all those listening that I came to poetry and storytelling because I do pretty firmly believe we can't hit the things we can't see. And I wanted to start writing to share my experience both with fear and with hope. And so I'm just going to read you 2 poems, or maybe 3 if we've got time today. The first one is a little more lighthearted. I wrote it from the perspective of my favorite candy bar, which is a Hershey's bar. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with those, but you can imagine your favorite chocolate bar, and that's who I wrote it from. And the names I mentioned are some of my favorite basketball players here in the States. So this one is called The Hershey's Bar Says Hello from the Corner.
All right.
He says, hey, man, yeah, I'm good. I mean, I'm good, as in sweet. Like, not so much solid, but more a chop off the old block. I'm carved and pressed, and I mean, I'm good. Man, my dad, he's good too. Thank you for asking. Dad was a hunk, a hammer of a man, heavy like Patrick Ewing in the paint. God, it was fun watching him play. My mom was a soft pour, a gentle white, smooth as a Steph Curry 3-pointer. Did you see that game last night? Woo! He can really play. She couldn't dress much, my mom, but I mean, a product is a product is a product, and here I am all wrapped up about it like I got a cold or a story aching inside my chest. Like, there are some things you just don't want to talk about, I mean, like, what are you really made of? I mean, who knows what kind of violence runs when I melt, and I do. I do not do well in heat. I am small enough to fit in a pocket, but I will ruin a whole purse sometimes. I am just ready to go off on anyone that tries to bite.
Wow.
And so the most important line of that poem, it's supposed to be funny, of course, and comical. Of course, we can all relate to eating our favorite candy, but the most important line there is that we all have things we just don't want to talk about. And for this next piece, I was really inspired by the poet Bianca Stone, who has a line. She says, tonight I will speak to my demons in present tense. All right. And so I decided to try to write a whole poem in which I spoke to my own demons in the present tense.
All right, great stuff.
Dear,
we'll come through to that one. But perhaps maybe back to you. How essential do you think things like art, things like music can do? How much can they do in trying to fight stigma?
Oh, it's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. Look, many cultures throughout history have survived without the wheel. They've survived without cars. They've survived without computers. I think we'd be hard-pressed to find a culture that has survived without art and storytelling. It is part of the fabric of human existence. It's what holds us together, these moments of shared storylines and plot lines where we intersect and cross. And so for us to have stories that help to normalize these less than perfect feelings, these illnesses, these struggles, for us to have stories like those that are part of our kind of social identity, I think that's actually one of the best places to start to undo stigmatization, especially around mental illness, because it starts to let people know that it's okay. It starts to normalize these things because it's suddenly in the narrative and the cultural exchange, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and if you don't mind my adding something in there, I think the other thing that's really powerful about using art to break down stigma is that it creates something outside of ourselves that we can talk about. So if I write a story, or if I write a poem, or if I paint a picture about my experience, it creates something that isn't me that I can then share with the world or share with my family, that they can look at it and engage with it without engaging with a conversation of how scary it can be to tell your loved one that you're afraid for them, or that you're scared that they're not going to get better. Maybe it's easier to engage with art as something that's slightly sort of one step removed from ourselves, even though it is, of course, a product of our experience. It might be easier for people who are afraid to engage in that conversation to engage with a piece of art than the individual themselves.
All right, and we just had there how art can then also come through and help in fighting stigma. But going back to the subject itself, stigma and its impact on the service users as well as the society, because many times I've seen that not only is maybe in terms of mental health, maybe the person who's suffering from mental health is a victim of stigma, but on the whole, even society, even if sometimes we are the ones who are actually pushing stigma, in totality we are victims also sometimes of demons and our fears and stuff like that. Could you describe for us the impact of stigma? That's you, could.
All right. Okay. The impact of stigma, are very, severe, and and the sad part of it is that we human beings, sometimes we are so cruel to each other, and just having an understanding that mental illness is illness like any other illness, that people who are suffering from this illness, they deserve love, they deserve respect. You can't, there is a lot of stories of people assaulting people with mental illness because they want to correct a behavior. They will say, oh, this guy is just busy. He can't stop eating. We have to beat him up. In a way, you are actually being physically violent over someone who can't control, who doesn't have any control about their behavior. So in a way, it's about changing our mindset, and trying to identify mental illness as similar to physical illness. That the government needs to give more attention to both mental and physical health. Because going through the research, in Africa, 95% of the budget is towards physical health, and I think less than 5% is directed towards mental health. And that's very sad. And this is also the same in other developing countries in Asia. That the mental health is just pushed aside. But the mental health is so important because, like they are saying that in the next 30 years, almost 1 in every 2 people, will have mental illness. At the moment, 1 in every 4 people is going through some mental illness of some sort. So it's an illness that has been put at the back burner, but it has to now be identified as an illness, and we have to come together, the government, the health system, and try to support and treat people with illness. So mindset, just changing the mindset is a big thing. Just changing the mindset and seeing that it's an illness. It's priceless. You don't have to pay for it. It's something that you just have to change that mind and change the old narrative that mental illness is part of the the Western part. It's not part of the Western part. It affects each and every person in any part of the world.
All right, it is 29 minutes past 2 o'clock. If you're just joining us, you are on Diamond FM. This is a special edition of the Reach Out, and today we are speaking with Ellie Cashel, who's the president of an organization in the United States of America called Suffering the Silence, as well as Mike Rawson. He's a mental health advocate, he's a singer, he's a poet. He just given us a poem there. He will give us 1 or 2 more before he leaves us, because he will be leaving us a bit earlier than the others. And Mike is in New York, and Ali Cashel is in Vermont, and in Australia we have Kudzai Nyamande, who's the chairperson of Nekutenda Disability Foundation, and we are bringing you this special edition of the Reach Out courtesy of Nekutenda Disability Foundation. And Ali, coming back to you, there's something quite touching that you told me, where you got to mental health professionals. These are medical doctors, these are qualified personnel, pretty enlightened people who are educated, but you come into their office and they tell you, look, what you're suffering from is kind of like made up, because there's no possibility that you can have this mental condition. Many times when we think about stigma, we associate it with people who are less enlightened, but these are medical doctors, these are professionals, these are people in the know. Personally, Ellie, what impact, how did this affect you? And I want you to put yourself in the position perhaps of somebody who's not as strong as you are, because you then proceeded to say, look, I'll challenge this, I'll push, and I'll begin to champion this cause for others. But there are many others who then don't have the courage. What effect do you think it has on them and their ability to then conduct their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have to be honest with you, I didn't always have this kind of courage. It took me quite a long time to feel safe enough and comfortable enough to speak out and start talking about my experience. And I think when you do face stigma from something as large as sort of medical institutions in the United States, some of the smartest and best educated people in the world, and when you face stigma from those individuals and those hospitals, it really made me question my sense of reality. It made me question my understanding of my body, my understanding of my perceptions of the world. And I wondered sort of who am I to speak up against these doctors and say, I think you're wrong. I think something else is going on here. And I think that I should be able to tell you that. I was just a 17-year-old girl, and I didn't have the strength then to say that, and I think that many people probably don't have the strength to say that, and I worry about those of us who are sort of pushed out of the system, pushed out of treatment, and don't have the resources that I had around me and the support from my family to find the right doctor, to find the right person who can help you get better. I think for those of us who can't do that, I worry about how broken we might feel if we don't have that support and if we can't find that support.
All right, and Mike, as society, what can we do? I want you to take us through perhaps the initiatives and perhaps the direction that you would want to see society do over like in the United States of America and perhaps globally. Just what can we do in our little communities to begin to fight a stigma?
Sure. Now, of course, first of all, I think Ali's story is just so beautiful and powerful, and really is inspiring, and there's so much more to say there. But in terms of answering your question, now, of course, there are bigger changes that can and should happen on a political and legislation level that, I would encourage politicians and school administrators and hospital administrators to start thinking about. But the surprising thing about mental health stigma and mental illness stigma is that there's actually a tremendous amount that we can each do every day without all that much effort. It doesn't, I think one of the misconceptions is that there has to be this huge change that we all have to really turn our lives around and completely revolutionize everything. And, maybe, maybe that's true, but there's some really simple things that we can do. And the first is that I encourage everybody who I speak to at my shows. I say, share one thing on social media that didn't go right this week. Share one thing that wasn't perfect and talk about it. And just say, hey, today was a difficult day at work, but we made it through.
Okay.
And that's it. And in that small way, we start to invite moments into public conversation that are not 100% wonderful. And we start to give these inroads to folks who need to share more about the difficult times that are going on. So I think if we can all just make an effort to share one thing a week that didn't go so well for us, that's a really important step. And then to also just ask meaningful questions of people that we love and care about, to really ask, hey, how are you?
All right.
And listen for the answer rather than
I like what you say
jumping to the next question.
Yeah, I like what you say. You said, we ask them, how are you? And we listen for the answer. Because many times we ask questions and we never listen.
Yeah, it's funny. A close friend of mine co-founded Suffering the Silence with me. Her name is Erica. And one of the things that we have sort of caught ourselves doing, Erica lives with a disease called lupus. And we'll text each other or say hello and say, hey, how are you? And we used to always say, oh, we're fine, we're good, we're fine. And sort of ignore maybe what's going on or the bigger picture, and we've sort of pushed ourselves to give a more honest answer when we answer that question, and then really hear what the other person is saying, as you've described, Mike. And it's been really powerful for our relationship, and I think that could have a really amazing effect if we all brought that into our routines.
All right, great stuff. And perhaps you can then bring the Zimbabwean situation into context here. But I wanted to perhaps ask you this. You know the Zimbabwean situation concerning HIV/AIDS and how there was so much stigma going that, but society, government, international institutions came through, and there was a lot of communication over that to the extent that we can, in a way, say we successfully as a nation fought stigma as far as people with HIV/AIDS are concerned. Do you see, or do you think there's a possibility that that same consensus, that same concerted effort can be brought about in trying to address stigma concerning people with mental health issues?
That's a very good question, JD. And you know what, the issue of HIV, there was a lot of funding as well. There was a lot of concerted effort. But you know, I liked what Ali said about normalizing the conversations around mental illness. I think in Zimbabwe we haven't reached at that point of normalizing that. You know, like at the moment you start to mention about mental illness, people will start to frown, and people don't get involved. So the stigma is so entrenched. And which is the reason why when we started Nokutenda, I think we are the first organization to do a mental health session on radio.
Indeed,
we are the first to do that.
Indeed,
no one has ever done that. Yeah, and also if you look at we have been looking for land to build our treatment centers, and people will say, we don't want you to bring those bad evils. What do you want to bring to our community? So even the community leaders are thinking that by having a center next to them with people with mental illness, you are bringing some bad vibes, you are bringing some bad spirit. It's still so entrenched, and so we need to kind of come to a position of accepting that mental illness is just an illness. And you know what? These issues about witchcraft and religion, mental illness can be explained through CT scans, through blood tests, that there is some certain neurotransmitters which are not having in the right balance. So it's a mental. We have to put it in our head that is an illness. That's the first big step.
Oh, all right. And you spoke there about communication. It must be communicated. And we got Mike Rosen, poet, singer, and he's a master communicator. Mike, you had promised us another poem. If we could just have that, and perhaps it will help drive the message that we don't need to stigmatize anybody.
Absolutely. So this one requires a little bit more bravery on the part of our listeners. So I want to invite everybody to put on their bravery hats. And this one is borrowed from a line by a poet named Bianca Stone. And she writes, tonight I'll speak to my demons in present tense. And following the lead of Ali, trying to be brave to share my own story. This one is me talking to the things that I really struggle with. So here we go. Dear love, you are nothing but a heart jaundiced and covered in tar from someone else's cigarette. You are a cliff dive and pitfall. You are my every dream shattered and spread across the lawn like fertilizer. I can think that your light is rented and that your rent is late. You are a satellite deluded enough to think you are a moon. Dear anxiety, would you just stop it? Dear suicide, you're the only friend I can't party without. You are a bartender's steady hand, the coal in an otherwise healthy train car. You are the echo of not enough, not enough, not enough that bounces off of everything I am capable of accomplishing today. You are the black spine constructed inside of my faulty DNA. You are my mother in her best dress, my father trying to undo the zipper from her side. Dear spoken word poet, you are a leaky faucet, a foamy beer, a champagne too shaken. You are all the good things. in excess. You are the life of every party, aren't you? Look how you flood the room so bright that no one can see the rope bridge swinging inside me. You are the lie that all my roads lead somewhere, that I actually like it with this microphone on.
Wow. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piece there. And I like, wow, the leaking faucet and your every good thing in excess, the spoken word poet. Great stuff there. And Mike, you had indicated that perhaps you may want to leave us a bit earlier. So I'll direct this question to you. But in terms of resources, in terms of programs that we can have to begin to address stigma, what do you think we can begin to do tomorrow in terms of resources? What do we need to gather in terms of programs? What can we begin to do?
Absolutely. Gosh, I love the question of what are the resources we need, and then I love to turn it around, because I really honestly believe that to get started, we all already have the things we need.
Great stuff.
We have each other. We have conversations. And I mentioned before, you can ask, how are you? You can also say, hey, how are you feeling today? And it's a similar question, but it's just different enough that it opens up a moment for people to really think about that. Because unfortunately, most of us are so ambitious all the time that we rarely get to stop and think about how we are actually feeling. And all of us in our lives are going to experience anxiety. We're going to experience stress. We're going to experience grief. Everyone is going to pass away at some point, and we're going to lose people we love. And it's just so important that we start today to begin to invite these topics out of the light. I often think of my favorite athlete. His name was Wayne Gretzky. He was the world's greatest hockey player, but he was little, and hockey is such a violent sport. And they once asked one of his rivals, they said, "Why didn't you just hit him? Why didn't you just hit him? He was, so small. You could have just hit him and taken him out." And the guy responded. He said, "Hey, you can't hit what you can't see." And so I think that's true of invisible illness as well. If we can just start inviting it into the light by making these little cracks in conversations, that's really all we need. And of course, the organizations that you have on this program right now can talk more about the bigger policy changes and the systemic changes. But I want us to focus just on how we treat, the next conversation we have today when this program ends. I think that's where we can really start.
All right, great stuff there, Mike. And if you're rushing somewhere, thank you very much for coming through. And I'm hoping that we'll be getting to hear lots more of your poems, and you'll be able to join us back on future programs, Mike.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And to Kudzai and Ali, thank you both. It has been such an honor. And absolutely, I will be back as soon as you are willing to have me.
Oh, great stuff there. And Ali, there's something that Mike just said there, conversations. What conversations are going on in terms of your organizations? Who are you engaging? Who are you talking to? And what is coming out of there in terms of fighting stigma?
Great, yeah, thank you. So the populations that we work with are anybody, as I mentioned earlier, who lives with an invisible condition. We're also starting to work quite a bit with people with physical disabilities as well that maybe you can see, but who feel like they can't talk about their experience, that they can't reveal this aspect of themselves. And what we're doing is we're creating sort of multiple different spaces for them to start to speak up and to tell their stories. And if anyone listening is interested in publishing your story or sharing your story with a global audience from the United States, you have a platform to do that. So we encourage people to write about their experiences and to publish their writing on our website, which is sufferingthesilence.org. We also regularly host storytelling nights and retreats where people can come together and speak about their experiences, to genuinely ask those questions like, how are you feeling? And to learn the tools and gain the resources that they need to live a healthier life and feel supported as they move through their healing journey and move through their illness journey as well. So we're regularly hosting events such as that and sharing resources with the community. But also what we're doing is we're using art, as Mike has done, to help bring these conversations into the foreground, into the social fiber of our society, so that even if you're not somebody who lives with mental illness or physical illness, that you're thinking about it, that you know it. So we use photography. We just are starting work on a documentary film to try and bring these conversations and bring these experiences to the foreground, as Mike said, into the light, so that we can see them and that we can engage with those stories and engage with those people, so that they feel supported, but also so that we as a culture start to break down some of that stigma. I think the HIV example is an amazing, we had a similar experience here in the United States, where we really came together to fight a lot of that stigma. And of course there's still stigma associated with HIV, but it's much better than it once was. And I hope that we can do that with a number of other illnesses and conditions as well.
All right, great stuff. And Kudzai, here in Zimbabwe, Nokutenda Disability Foundation, we know that even by having this conversation on radio, like you were saying, this is the first time on radio in Zimbabwe that we have every month an hour dedicated to just having a conversation on mental health issues. I remember last month we were speaking about bipolar disorder. Today we're focusing on stigma. What conversations are you as a foundation having both with other organizations, like, and I'm honored to have you here, you assisted us in getting to be speaking with Ali there. But coming back home, are there other organizations as well as institutions, government and quasi-government institutions that you're having conversations with?
Yeah, good question, JP. Yeah, we have been having conversations with our national, like Ali, who's suffering the silence, and it's been an honor having her and her input. But locally, we have also been having conversations with some organizations. But I think we face a lot of challenges in Zimbabwe. There's a lot of challenges there, and I think it's the main challenge is that perception that mental illness is not that important. Physical illness needs more input than mental illness. So that's still the kind of the flavor of the conversation. But we have been we had a chance to speak to one of the Minister of Social Welfare, Patricia Kagoni, where we liaise with her, and so we have been talking to other partners as well in Zimbabwe Diaspora Health Network about the kind of interventions that we are going to be doing in Zimbabwe. So unfortunately, there is a lot of bureaucracy. As you know, with like even the idea of building, getting land. I told you about the difficulties about even getting a site for mental illness. And also the bureaucracy of applying for permits and applying for the plan has to be seen, and it takes a long time to get things moving.
All right. And
our partners here are happy to start the ball rolling, but there is all these hoops that you have to jump.
All right.
So I think we are still going to press on, but the hope is that mental illness has to be put on the spotlight as well.
All right.
We want even the Mental Health Act. There is no pro Mental Health Act at the moment in Zimbabwe. We would want to work with the government, work with partners here who can help with crafting a Mental Health Act policy.
All right.
So we are hoping that the new government and everything, we are going to speed things up.
All right.
And make sure that we do something.
Okay. And Ali, could you speak in there about bureaucracy in government? And we're hoping that the authorities, they'll also be listening, and we also do our part as journalists to make sure that we engage them on some of the issues that are raised here. But Ali, just to put it also into context, because I know that the health delivery system in the United States of America is vastly different from what we have here. But how involved is the federal government of the United States in perhaps providing health care for people with mental challenges, or is it largely in the hands of private institutions and stuff like that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Healthcare is enormous conversation right now in the United States as we sort of struggle to decide whether or not we think that the federal government should take healthcare on and be one of the bigger institutions that is sharing it with the people of the United States. But primarily right now, we do have systems in place that are federal government systems like Medicare that give people access to a certain level of treatment. But most of our insurance comes through private insurance companies that then give you access to certain medical therapies and treatments that they will pay for or not. So, for example, mental health is one of the things that we really struggle to get the funding for as individuals and the payments for as individuals. And I think that's a real problem that isn't being talked quite enough about here in the United States, is how can we make mental health care both affordable and also accessible to people. Especially people with lower incomes here in the United States don't think of mental health and mental health care as something that they can do. It's often sort of considered a wealthy problem to be depressed. And I think the reason for that is that wealthier people have access to get the treatment that they need, not the people who have lower income, who don't have the same resources that wealthier people have. Of course, they still suffer from these conditions, but they might not have the care that they need. And I think we need to be doing more as a society to make sure that people have access to that kind of care and to remove the stigma associated with it as well, as you guys are working on too. So I think it's true our systems are very different, but I wonder if we're sort of asking the same questions of ourselves, even though our cultures and sort of the systems in place are as different as they are.
All right, great stuff there. And because of our time, shortly we would be having to round off this program. I could see immediately as Nokutenda Disability Foundation, not only just focusing on stigma, what other programs do you have lined up in terms of just trying to keep the conversations going on, as well as to really make sure that in a very short while from now, we'll really see boots on the ground as work really starts on the establishment of your centers, as well as programs to alleviate the lives of people with mental health challenges in Zimbabwe?
Okay, that's a very good question. We have already, we have land procured in Goromonzi. So we are in the process of, trying to arrange to start actually build the center. But we have the land. The land is there. There is some, like what I told you about application that is needed, which can make things a bit longer. But we are hoping that with now things in place in Zimbabwe, the government in place, things are going to start to move quickly. Yeah. We also have got the web chart that, we understand that where anyone can access, can talk to a mental health professional online. So anyone can just log in on our website. We understand that the price of internet is reduced in Zimbabwe, so which obviously is going to be good news in the sense that people can kind of start to use our services. So we were supposed to have the run in September. Wanted to do a mental health awareness. The run was supposed to be happening in Harare, but we have had to shelve it. Because at the moment, I think the situation wasn't so good that so we had to delay things a bit. But I think now with things now in place, the inauguration has been today, things are going to move, I think, hopefully quicker.
All right. So we'll make sure that we will be announcing the dates for the run there in aid of bringing awareness to people living with mental health challenges, and not only the people, but also the challenges that the health delivery services to people with mental conditions they face. So we're hoping that as soon as the actual dates and venues are out, we'll be able to carry that through and make sure that our listeners are aware of when and where it is taking place. And Ali, people may want to get in touch with Suffering the Silence. Where can we get you? How can people get in touch with you? Are you on the internet? How do they find you?
Yes, you can find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. You can also visit our website, which is sufferingthesilence.com. And if you ever want to reach out to me, I'm also available online. My email is listed on the site, and I'm always excited to hear from people around the world and connect with people around the world. I think the more that we can reach out to each other and stand together and support each other, the stronger we'll be as we come together as sort of a global community as well. So I hope to hear from some of you soon.
Great stuff, Fandal. Thank you very much, Ellie, for coming through and having this conversation with us on Diamond FM.
Thank you.
All right. There was Ali Cashel there. She's the president of an organization in the United States of America called Suffering the Silence. And she has a very compelling story of her own of how then she ended up championing the cause of people living with conditions, people who are facing stigma in various health conditions. But today we heard her just to have a conversation with her also, but focusing mainly on stigma for people or against people living with mental health conditions, which is something that is harrowingly obvious, especially for anybody who's familiar with our situation here in Zimbabwe concerning people with mental health challenges. And we also have Kudzai Nyamande, who's the chairperson of Nokutenda Disability Foundation. And Kudzai, your organization is championing the rights of people with mental health conditions. And he was telling us there about how they've procured land, and there's going to be a run. But Kudzai, just before I let you go, how do people get in touch with you, and just your final thoughts regarding people living with mental health conditions and what encouragement you can give them?
Okay. But I would say if you want to get, we are also available on the internet with an email, which is on our website. We have got people in Zimbabwe who you can talk to. You can also use our web chat, which is available through the internet. Mm-hmm. So we are in the process of having phone numbers, toll-free numbers, at our offices in Belvedere. So, but there is numbers there that on our website that you can get hold of us. Oh. And before I go, regarding there's this term called SASCAM, which has been used so so loosely in Zimbabwe. It's a very derogatory term. Mm-hmm. These are some of the things that we are, with the stigma. Using those words like SASCAM is bad. It was. I don't know whether people know the origin of the word SASCAM. It was Salisbury Association of the Care of the African Mentally Handicapped. Mm-hmm. That's the meaning of SASCAM. And people use it, SASCAM and whatever. Using those words leads to stigma. Mm-hmm. And also, when a child is having a bad day, pain and that kind of thing, we have to be very careful about those words, because mental illness is an illness. So if someone is behaving badly and you are saying penga, you are kind of in a way it's some form of stigma, because someone with mental illness can't control how they act. Someone who is depressed can't control how they act. Someone with schizophrenia can't control how they act. So in a way, we need to change the way we speak.
All right. We need to change the way we speak, and we'll be speaking a lot more about that, how we speak, how we address issues, and it's something that is quite touching for me, that even I, growing up and in conversation, I've used that word SASCAM, but now that we've had this conversation, I begin to see that just that word, it's one word, but it's so powerful in a negative way in affecting another, and it is just perpetuating stigma. Kudzai, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Nokutenda for this program here, and I'm hoping that we'll have more enlightening conversations in subsequent shows.
Thanks a lot, JV. Thanks a lot for the program.
All right. This has been this week's edition of the Reach Out, a special program that we bring you every last Sunday of the month. And today is the 26th of August, 2018. And I heard on this particular day from the United States of America, from Vermont, I had Ali Cashel. She's a president of an organization called Suffering the Silence. She has a compelling story, and we're hoping that we'll be able to have her back on the program to talk more, because I believe that when we we hear the stories of human beings who've gone through certain situations, it really becomes alive in our own understanding, in our consciousness, that these things need to be fought against. We also had from Long Island in New York, Mike Ronson. He's a mental health advocate. He's a singer. He's a poet, and he recited 2 poems, very powerful poems there, where he was just teaching us or educating us and sharing with us on stigma. And from Australia, we have Kudzai Nyamande, who's a chairperson of Nokutenda Disability Foundation, who are the organization who are bringing us this program here. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Ellie, to Mike, and to Kudzai, and also a special thank you to you all listeners for listening in. And continue listening into Diamond FM as we bring you more entertaining programs. Good afternoon.
There is a plan and purpose to value every life, no matter what location, age, and gender, disability.